Chapter 1. Why job titles aren't that important in Denmark. When I make presentations to groups of internationals who have come to work in Denmark, I generally ask for just a few simple items: a screen, a remote control for the projector, and a glass of water. On a recent gig, I was provided with everything except the water. Since I had met several of the company's Danish employees when I arrived, handshakes with Meta and Søren and Nikolai, I asked one of them to kindly get me a glass of water. I asked Nikolai. Nikolai smiled and walked off and brought me back a glass of water. It was only after the presentation was finished, and I was at home making connections on LinkedIn, that I found out that Nikolai was Senior Vice President for Europe, with more than 650 people working under him, and a salary that must have been in the multi-million crown a year zone. But Nikolai had never mentioned his title to me, because that's just not done in Denmark. One of the most important words in the Danish language is ligestilling, equality. The belief that all Danish people are basically equal permeates every relationship and every interaction. You could dig deep into Danish history to find the reason for this passion for equality, which probably has something to do with the need for farmers and fishermen to cooperate in order to make it through the harsh Scandinavian winters. Fancy job titles do not fit that passion for equality. They suggest that you think you're better than someone else, which you might actually be if you've worked your way to the top of your field, but that admission is slightly embarrassing. Jantelov, or the law of Jante, the informal but ubiquitous Danish social code, forbids the display of any kind of status. If you do have an impressive job title, it's considered bad taste to show it off. For example, office doors in Denmark often just have the name of the person inside, not their title. When you introduce yourself, whether to one person or an audience of 500, you just give your name, preferably your first name, like Nikolai did. And it's considered laughable to strut about in a way that shows everyone you're the boss. In fact, when you enter a room full of Danish business people, it is almost impossible to tell which one is the boss. Everyone's dressed the same. Everyone acts pretty much the same, and nobody shows any particular deference to the boss. This can be a problem when you're a job hunter or a salesperson and have to figure out who in the room has the power to make a decision. To Danes, titles are pompous. Even doctors and professors use their first name in a spoken context or a casual written communication. But the lack of titles can be confusing to foreigners who do business with Danes. Many people, particularly those from hierarchical cultures, want to deal with a Dane of a similar status as their own. So when highly educated Danes sign an email with just their first names, as is considered good, equal manners in Denmark, people from hierarchical societies often assume they're talking to a secretary or an intern. For a Dane, titles are a little bit like putting on a costume at a party. Titles seem artificial and make them feel slightly uncomfortable. When people from other cultures proudly reel off their elaborate titles, the Danes find it tiresome and pretentious. The truth is, Danes don't always understand how competitive the world outside Denmark can be. In the USA, India, the UK, China, the competition to get into the best schools is brutal and begins in childhood. A good primary school may be necessary in order to access a good secondary school, which can set you up for a good university. If you outperform everyone else at all three, you might get a chance at a good job at a good company, and then work your way up to a fancy title. That fancy title means your hard work is paid off. It means you've won. Having grown up in a welfare state with an extensive safety net, it can be hard for Danes to comprehend how important it is to win and how far and fast you can fall if you don't. In Denmark, it's much less common to obsess about the top primary schools or the top secondary schools. There are only a few universities, each of which is top in its own field. throughout the Danish educational system, the focus is on group work, not individual excellence. Successful students focus on building the network they'll need to get good student jobs and internships in their fields, not antagonizing people by showing they're the smartest ones around. Danes who have the smartest one around type of personality often end up leaving Denmark. I know of several who now run successful businesses in the U.S. Anyway, Danes doing business in Denmark don't start a conversation with a potential new contact by asking about titles. They chat about teams, projects, customers, goals, and maybe past companies they've worked for. If a title is mentioned at all, it is mentioned at the end of the conversation. To be fair, the flat management structure at Danish companies means someone's title doesn't always reflect how much power they have, or their ability to hire or sign on the dotted line, or whether or not they'll be asked to get a visiting speaker a glass of water.